Jeopardy.
Okay, good afternoon. This is the June 2019 Community Forum. I am Keith Hurley, the Executive Director for the Yakima Regional Clean Air Agency. We're going to start with some introductions. We're going to start on my right and go counterclockwise.
Dan DeGroat.
Carolyn DeGroat.
Steve George.
Hassan Tahat.
Mark Edler.
Kelsey Sanford.
Pamela Herman.
Sandy Braden.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So, our topic today was submitted by Steve George on behalf of Sage Consulting, and he was a bunch of questions on our complaint program. So what we're going to do is give me a few minutes to go through my presentation, then we'll open it up for free discussion afterwards, and we'll go from there. So first things first about our complaint, everybody's got the handout. It's an excerpt of our admin code, section 5, and that section of our admin code also doubles as our compliance assurance manual. So these rules have been in effect since before I even started here. So this is an excerpt that I put together to focus us on today's discussion. It gives an outline on the general way that we manage the complaint program. These rules are not they're not really rules, it's our admin code, but they're not going to cover every instance, as we'll probably find out in the discussion. So these are what we generally adhere to, and since I've been here, and I've been the compliance director as well, I've been adamant that we follow it to the maximum standard that we can, but the agency retains the right to flex this depending on the situation, because no written plan covers every contingency ever that happens. So the first thing we do is we have a complaints manager, and Kelsey Sanford's here today because she's been the complaints manager for the last 3 or 4 years, if not shorter or longer. Is that about right?
I'd say, yeah, about right.
Yeah, so before her, it was Dustin, and before that it was myself. So, and then I was both of their direct supervisor before I took over, was appointed or selected for this position. So generally speaking, we're going to go and I'm going to try to go down the questions that Sage Consulting had submitted, and then we'll just, I think it'll answer a lot of questions, and then we'll go from there. So the first question is, how does YRCA receive and evaluate complaints? So we can receive complaints in a number of ways. We can receive complaints, obviously, via a person walking in. They can fill out a complaint form, English or Spanish, online. They can call in and leave it on the complaints line, because there's a direct line dedicated to that as well. But what y'all might not know is that we also receive complaints directly from agencies that have received complaints from somebody within our jurisdictional boundaries. So we can receive ERTS, that's a complaints response digital system from Department of Ecology, and EPA has a complaint system that's similar to that. I don't know what they call it, but we receive complaints that they'll forward to either myself or Kelsey. And if it comes to me or anybody else, it gets forwarded to Kelsey, and Kelsey does her investigation minus any input from the office so that she can schedule it as well, because she's also the air monitoring tech. So those two jobs are pretty important. So once she receives it, she'll evaluate it, and she'll evaluate it for a couple of things. So we validate the complaint, and this is these are terms that, again, are board approved from years ago. So we have to validate the complaint. So when we validate the complaint, it goes through the process of, first, does it fulfill the 5 minimum requirements to be a valid complaint? And the five minimum requirements are listed there on the top of your handout. It must allege an actual air pollution violation of which the agency has jurisdiction. So I'll cover a little bit of these a little bit as we go on. So clearly, if we get a complaint within the Indian Reservation or within Kittitas County, that's obviously that would not be a valid complaint for our purposes. And then if it were to complain of something that we don't have jurisdiction over, in other words, anything but an air pollution area that we're experts in or we work in, then we would not address it as well. We would attempt to forward it to the appropriate person, but sometimes that's not the easiest thing. I'll use asbestos as a good example. Every so often receive asbestos complaints from the tribe, from somebody that lives within the boundaries of the nation, but we wouldn't have jurisdiction over them. So what we would do is we'll try to forward them to the appropriate people, which in this case would be EPA, and I can't tell you the name of the person right now. Dustin might have been, but they don't have a asbestos program like we do, but they have somebody at EPA that would be able to direct it to somebody else at EPA. So that's a good example. The alleged violator must be identified or is identified, but that doesn't have to be a name. It can also be a location if need be. Anything that we can use to narrow down where we're going. The complainant has to be identified. The location of the alleged violation is identified for obvious reasons, and then the date and time of the alleged violation is identified, and that's important for us because I want to just tell you all this right now. We don't have to go to every one of these, and you'll see why here in a few minutes. Some of these we can address via a phone call as well, and of course the agency has great broad discretion via the Clean Air Act on how we respond to these as well. So if the complaint, so that next bullet there is kind of important because if the complaint did not or will not supply all the above information, the complaint will not be considered a valid complaint and no response action will be conducted. The database will be updated to reflect that there was insufficient information for the complaint to qualify as a valid complaint. Now with that said, it's been my practice since I've been here, so for the last 12, 13 years, that if we can address it and we can get at least some kind of resolution, no matter what it is, help us understand what was going on, if we can talk to somebody, we might not necessarily just enter it as, we might not follow it up, even if it's deemed invalid. Does that make sense what I'm saying there? Because I reserve the right to try and go out and positively impact whoever I can when I can within the boundaries that the agency has or within the legal jurisdiction that we have. So how does the YRC receive and evaluate complaints? I just answered that question. How are they determined to be valid is...
Quick question before you leave this top section.
Uh-huh.
Explain again how you deal with item number B.
The alleged violator is identified. They have to be identified. If they're not identified, we'll evaluate what the complaint is and see if we can go out and take a look at it. So even though technically by this writing it might be, that invalidates it, that doesn't mean that I don't have the authority to go out and see if I can prevent something from happening as well. Does that make sense?
Not really.
So what's your question?
Well, part of your criteria that has to be met is B. And if I'm driving down the road, and I've had this happen, I see a guy burning a pile of green grass that he just clipped off his lawn.
Mm-hmm.
And it's putting up the big old white smoke. I don't know who he is. He might probably not going to give you. I want your name, Sandy. Give me your name so I can call you in to clean it.
We're not telling you have to stop and talk to the guy though.
No, I know, but so
Yeah.
I'm wondering how that really works in practice.
Okay, so I'll tell you how it works in practice. Let's say somebody's driving from Tri-Cities to Seattle and they go by here. And let's say they see somebody burning black tires on the side of the road. And they don't want to identify themselves. If I were to treat that as an invalid complaint by these rules, we wouldn't go check it out. But you and I both know, Steve, that tires being burnt are some of the most toxic things anybody can breathe. So I would feel it's my duty to see if A, if it's true, and B, can we stop it? And I call them drive-by complaints, once or twice a year. So that's how we would apply
So
it.
it depends on if they tell you what's burning. That kind of
It depends on a lot of things. That's one of the big things, though. And that goes to health as well. Because we already know that rubber tires are we're never going to accept them burning. That's a prohibited material, and there's a reason it's prohibited. So that's a very specific example, but it's dependent on the situation. And again, as the air pollution control officer, I reserve the right to see if I can go prevent something. And in this case, if we could go out and have them stop burning the tires, we would do that. And then probably in that case, issue a ticket as well. So.
Okay, so these criteria are subject to modification.
These are minimum criteria, but they are by no means restrictive or mandatory that we have to stick to them. Okay? We're not gonna make stuff up, but we're gonna see if we can go out and positively impact it if we can. Now, if we were to get a complaint that wasn't that valid or that important, we might, say, okay, we need more information, and we might be able to call them and get it. So it depends on the whole situation that we're able to ascertain from the call. Now, if Kelsey can talk to them, or if they call and then we can call back and get further information, I can tell you that probably a high percentage, if they're incomplete, we do call back and try to get complete information. But what it's not is, oh, we didn't get this, let's hang up the phone and not even address it. We will never do that. We will address it as best as we can.
My personal opinion, then reading the first sentence of the disclaimer below the A through E, is not consistent with what you just said.
I agree with you, Steve.
And you administer however you want, Keith. But my input to you is that sentence is not consistent with.
Which one are you talking about, though?
If the complainant did not or will not supply all of the.
Oh, no, you said top here, and I was looking up here,
Yeah,
but
that's
no, that's my point for telling you that. I have always said that we will, and I used to tell the previous director this: if we can go out and we can take a look at it and we can address it one way or the other, we will.
I think to clarify that, if you struck will, the complaint will not be considered. If you struck will and put may not be considered, you would be okay.
I think we're okay how we are.
Okay.
But this isn't about rewriting an admin code today. This is about
No,
giving everybody
I agree, but
an idea how we were going to address our response to complaints. Your point is valid, because I said that before, but I owe it to us to try and continue to try and address it. And
no, I appreciate that. I'm
and
glad
that's
that you
what
do
we're
it
gonna-
that way.
yeah,
I think that's the way it
continue to
ought
do.
to be done. Yeah.
okay.
Does the person making the complaint have to identify themselves and tell about how they know that they're reporting a violation?
They should identify themselves.
Are they required to?
By this, and that's what Steve's point is they are required to, but because they don't, that doesn't paint us into a corner where we don't have to respond to it or go
Right,
do an investigation. What was the other half of your question now?
And then you report how they know that it's a violation.
They don't have to.
I mean, I see black smoke.
No, they don't have to. They don't have to say. They have to tell us what they think is the violation,
Well, yeah.
and then we would evaluate it.
You've had
Yeah.
situations where people reported burning and they actually had a permit and it was illegal.
Oh,
burning.
absolutely, yeah. So, yeah. So, good.
Or they were burning with a permit, but the permit was not the correct permit for the occasion.
I agree.
Yeah, there's a whole permutation of scenarios that we can come up with here, and I would tell both of you, you're not going to tell me something new that I haven't seen in 13 years. So does the agency have any control over the complaint topic? Only in the sense that it has to be an air pollution jurisdiction, or something that we have jurisdiction over in the air pollution world. So it can be anything, if they called in a complaint about asbestos, we have jurisdiction over that. If they called in a complaint over another media like soils, pesticides, water, we don't have jurisdiction over that. So that's about the only control we would have over the topic.
How about like smudge pots?
That's air pollution, but it depends on what the complaint is, because smudge pots aren't illegal. But Hassan has done for years trying to get them to be natural gas.
Sure, and there's natural gas, and there's also the right way to run a smudge pot, and there's the wrong way to run a smudge pot.
Right. But smudge pot use is not,
I'm seeing a picture of a smudge pot.
smudge pot use is not a violation of our air pollution rules. So that's that. So questions number 3 and 4 are kind of related. So what happens when the agency receives complaints repeatedly from one individual and it becomes apparent what I'm going to do is skip those because I want to go down here to. Actually, what I want to do is I want to walk through the complaint response flow chart first. Okay, so once Kelsey gets it and she gets what she thinks is as much information as she can get at the time, she'll evaluate it and she'll put an RL level, and that RL stands for response level. The response levels are on the back. Okay?
Can I ask one more question? Are complaints required to come in during business hours?
No, they can come in 24/7. That's why we got a dedicated line, and that's why they can be submitted via email off of the website
So
as well.
a person's answering it 24/7?
No, the person's not answering 24/7. We work Monday through Friday. So
Right.
when she comes in Monday, she'll look at the emails or she'll look at the complaints line and she'll
And
pick
there's
it
a
up.
recorded
Right.
message there?
Right.
Okay.
So we don't, just a little bucket to file away, I don't have to see somebody burning to write them a ticket or to take action or to investigate it. But if I can go to a site, if one of my guys can go to a site 24, 48, 36 hours later and see evidence of a burn, then we can continue to do it. But that's the investigative process. That's why we have the process that we go through and try to address it. What this agency is not is an Uber enforcement agency. And I use that term intentionally because about 13 years ago, I was sitting in a meeting between two large fruit companies. And I don't want to get into the details about it, but they both had their high-powered lawyers sitting in the meeting. And before the meeting got to start, one of the lawyers looked me in the eye, and I was not the director at the time. And they asked me point blank, do you see yourself as a Uber enforcement agency? And we do not. But apparently this lawyer saw DOE and the EPA as Uber enforcement authorities. But we don't do that. So we have a leeway. We're not like that. So we have leeway on how we can apply things and how we can investigate things. We want to be consistent. We want to be firm, but we also want to be fair to everybody involved. So when she gets a complaint, she's going to evaluate it. When she evaluates it, when she's all done, she's going to put a response level on it, and that's required. She enters all the data. Let's just say in theory we get all this information. We put an RL level onto it. And this flow diagram that you have, and why don't you pass one of these? Did you give him his? Did you give him yours?
I took more. I get it.
Okay. So let the recording show that our board, one of our board members, Steve Jones, is now in attendance. Dr. Jones. So you have a handout that I made. So the general complaint response flow chart is generally everything, I'd say about 95, 98% of everything will flow into this, okay? So this response diagram, this flow is designed to do a couple of things, a few things. One is to maximize our use and our appropriate use of our resources. The other thing is it's supposed to, it identifies anything that would become a high priority and it puts it forward on that day's work, because we don't have the luxury of other agencies. Like Kelsey doesn't get to be just the complaints manager. She has other duties. Hassan doesn't get to be just the NSR guy. He has major other duties. So we've all got other duties. So this helps her also prioritize her work. So we'll just walk through it real quick. So if she receives a complaint, and generally she'll go through this, whether it's valid or not, depending on if she feels she can make more headway, okay? So what she'll do is if the complaint comes in, first question she'll ask is it health related? And generally speaking, that can be a couple of things, like if somebody has a documented health history of cancer or asthma or something, and somebody's burning right beside them and that smoke is coming off that property and impacting that structure, that's a health type of complaint. Or if a chemical company is burning. We had a situation a long time ago, and Hassan can speak to this, where a company had caught fire and it was chemicals that was on fire. And one of the things that the emergency responders did was called the agency, and it's not in the complaint aspect of it, but you'll see kind of how it ties in. But they asked the agency on if they should put the fire out with water or not. And if I'm correct in my memory here, Hassan and the director, Gary, had said, no, don't put water in it, because when you do that with the chemicals that were burning, it would have made it worse, which would have exacerbated the actual, health impact. So she'll see if there's an immediate health response, and those are very rare, less than maybe 1% of all of our complaints. Would you agree with that? So if it's health related, then it takes on a different urgency right there. So if it's health related, the next thing is it impacting the complaint? So we'll just use the asthma example. So it's not illegal to generate smoke. That smoke has to meet two things. It has to be leaving the property, and it must be impacting somebody. Because under nuisance laws, which is what we enforce here for these particular things, there has to be a victim, okay? So if it's not impacting the complaint, meaning in this case the smoke, they're burning legally and there's smoke, but it's not impacting anybody and it's not leaving the property, then it wouldn't be impacting the complaint. We'd go over to no. And as you can see to the right of that, the response level would be 3. And if you take a look and flip it over, you'll see that the response level for 3 is within 7 days. So let's just file that away. I'm going to walk through a couple others here real quick. So let's say, though, that it was impacting the complainant. So then it's a yes, and then is it still going? In other words, is the person still burning? And that's a yes, so that's an RL1. And that RL1 says same-day response. Well, I can tell you what happens is she can either get on the phone or she'll go out there immediately as soon as she gets everything gathered from when she comes in. And then we'll go from there. I will tell you that, again, 99% of our complaints are usually RL4 or RL3, and we still get same-day investigation on probably the vast majority of those. Where we wouldn't is if we see after putting an RL on it, she's got other things she's got to do, and she feels she might need to make a call to get other information. So it's been my guidance in the past that you put the correct RL response in the database, but if you can get there that day, if you feel like you're out and about doing work and it's, again, efficient use of resources and you can go by that area, then you go by that area and you get it done. And she's pretty good about doing that. So, but let's just say a complainant calls in and she's got her data and it's not health related. And there was a previous complaint on the same thing. If there's a no, you can see it diverts and goes over to RL4. But if there's a yes, then it drops down to RL3, response level 3. And that's where that terminates, right there. So if it's just to finish up on this diagram, if the complaint is received and it's alleged to be health related, and that's a yes, and we come down and it's still impacting the complainant, and it's still in progress. If the answer is no, we'll still assign it an RL2 because it's clearly not impacting the complainant. But a lot of that depends on what the complainant says as well. So there's the art in diagnosing what's going on. And if we can get to, if it's an RL2, but it has alleged some kind of health-related impact, Kelsey will still try to get out there that day if possible, if it's not ongoing. But if it is ongoing, it'll clearly be an RL1. So that's just the general RL response. That's the general use of the flow chart. The diagram, the last sentence on your handout states that complaints involving imminent danger to life or health will be responded to immediately regardless of the following guidance. And that's extremely rare, but the one example I can use is the chemical company that was on fire. Then, we're clearly in a situation where we need to make a quick, informed decision and either inform other people or other responders to that. So we'll jump back to the third question here. So what happens when the agency receives complaints repeatedly from one individual and it becomes apparent that it is a harassment complaint? So it's hard for this agency to say somebody's harassing somebody when feelings are involved with something. This is not a perfectly concrete, it can encompass everything that any complaint that anybody would have. It's never going to happen. That's the nature of the beast. I can tell you that I don't believe there's another local air agency that has a validation process. And I suspect that in the years past, the decades past, the reason this came up is because the prior board members, and when I say prior board members, I'm talking like before I even was involved here, hired here, I believe that they probably anticipated some gaming of the system, so to speak. Generally speaking, if we get multiple complaints, we'll go out and we'll see if we can, again, positively impact the situation. What we're not going to do is take action just to take action. If we can affect change or help, we'll do that. But there is, for me to sit here and say there's no gaming that goes on in the system, whether it be the person, and we get them once or twice a year, they're driving up from Tri-Cities to go to Seattle or Clay Elum, and they'll call in a complaint. That's a whole nother discussion we could have. But we try to respond to everything based on what the situation dictates, the information we're given, and does that kind of make sense? So I reserve the right that if I do feel down the road that they're invalid complaints or they're frivolous complaints, I reserve the right as the air pollution control officer to make sure that the agency ain't wasting resources or isn't unfairly targeting somebody. So that's that. The answer to that question. So the next question was, what happens when the agency finds the claim to be unfounded? Will they continue to investigate complaints from that individual? Well, the answer to that is simply, it depends. Okay. One of the complaints that we see a lot of is there's somebody and they've got a 20 by 20 by 50 pile of legitimate, burnable, natural debris. They're going to light it up. You need to come out here and do an investigation and write them a ticket. She can vouch for that. There's not a thing we're going to do because there's no violation taking place. Stacking that stuff, regardless of his intent, that is not a violation of anything. And then depending on where they're at, how they've got it stacked, what auspices they're burning under, there might never be a violation. But with all that said, if they have a valid permit and they're burning under valid reasons, if that's smoke, because for us, the fire, the heat is not, that's our friend, it's the smoke that we're concerned with. If that smoke leaves the property, it's now met the first criteria for writing a ticket. If it's impacting a structure like a school, a house, or a structure where people are at, where it can impact somebody, there's a victim, then we will plan our actions accordingly.
How and when do you determine if the permit that they have is the correct one?
What kind of permit are we talking about? Just give me one. Okay, let's talk about residential. So everybody knows at this point that we issue residential burn permits. Residential burn permits by state law are not valid within urban growth areas. So by law, they have to be outside the urban growth areas. They have to be within the county. So that's one. So two, you can get one here, and it's very narrowly defined. What a residential burn permit is used for. It's just generally speaking, it's for anything that's burned within the yard of the structure. And I believe there's a distance to the structure. Residential burn permits are very narrowly defined. On a residential, we have how many now? 4 agents?
There is some in the lower valley.
How many
Yeah,
total agents
there's
do we
more than
have?
4.
7.
7, okay.
Yeah.
So we have 7 total agents. And so they know they're only supposed to be issuing residential burn permits. They all know where those residential permits are supposed to be issued for. Now, do mistakes happen? Yes, but there's not a very big number on if they happen. So agricultural burn permits can only be gotten right here at the agency. And recreational burn permits, depending on what we're talking about, can only be gotten here. General rule permits are rules that you can burn under that are very clearly defined in our Reg 1 that don't require a permit or a fee. We request that people call us to do that burning to make sure we're not in a burn ban. Okay? So that's how, generally, that's how we ensure that people are burning under the correct burn permit. So the next question is, how is a claim that you're not handling correctly dealt with? Is it referred to another agency? So, Steve, could you clarify what that question means? Because I'm not sure.
I think I just wanted to know if you got a complaint and it wasn't within your jurisdiction, once you determined
So let's
that,
say
can
we
you
had a
refer
yeah.
complaint.
So let's say I'm driving to Ellensburg, and I see somebody clearly north of the county line, in Kittitas, in other words, burning a pile of rubber tires on the side of the road. And I would call the Department of Ecology, because that's who has air jurisdiction there. And I would probably call directly to Central Region Office, because that's their jurisdictional. And I would complain. So if it's a related air pollution thing, we know who to get a hold of.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's any other media, soils, and I'm just throwing these out as samples, soils, waters, pesticides, we would probably default to forwarding it to DOE and letting them sort it out. The training center is a good example. We actually have multiple jurisdictions on it. There's some DNR land there, but it's not forested. We're waiting to find out what those are. And then the Kittitas County line bisects almost right down the middle of it. And so the north third or north half is Kittitas County jurisdiction, not ours. So a good example is rock crushers. We'll permit rock crushers within our jurisdiction, but if they come into our jurisdiction and then get in place north of the county line on the res, that goes back to DOE to do it. So I still don't know is how is a claim that you're not handling correctly dealt with? I still don't know if I answered your question because
I was curious to know if you forwarded those to another agency, and you answered that.
Yeah.
But I got a question since you brought up the firing center. Came up Highway 24 yesterday from the east, and there was a fire up there somewhere on the.
Yeah, I saw the same one.
And it was,
I'm not convinced it was on the. It was big black smoke.
It was.
Right.
It
Yeah,
was.
I'm not convinced. So I at just real quick. So yesterday at about 5:45, actually about 6 o'clock, I was driving back from Ellensburg, and it was on a couple ridges over. So it's very close, and it could have been off of the res as well because it was deep on the
It
horizon.
was because it was north of 24. Because I came up 24.
When I came over up Tannum Ridge into that valley, there was a haze there, but I know where it was coming from because I saw it. So let's just say for this discussion,
So let's just say
it was.
Yeah. So
That fire particularly though, that fire, I know that was north of the.
do they have to? Does the Army have to report the fires out there to you guys?
Again, that's a good question. Not fires. So like one of the most common things that happens there is artillery rounds or small arms fire will ignite the firing range, something I'm excessively familiar with. Mm-hmm. And I have flown the fire bucket mission out there back in the life past. I'm not aware of them calling us and say we have a fire. They've had some big fires. Hassan, you've been here 20 years. Have they ever, they're not required to, but do they usually give us a courtesy call? But we end up finding out through regular media or our observation.
I guess my point is, do you guys ever any interaction with those guys out there to make sure, because they have had a history of having a lot of fires and some of them very big and some of them very devastating. Do you guys have any, and I know this is a little off the subject, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have any interaction with those guys to know what their fire plans are?
What are you talking about?
Fire suppression plans and or prevention.
No, because that's fire safety. It's not air pollution. It's fire safety is what it is. So who would probably have that might be the county fire marshal. But we wouldn't have it, just like we don't have DNRs. DNR tells us they want to burn, but we have no authority over DNR land or DNR permitting or any of that.
Well, you have authority over the state agencies and the Forest Service about how and when they're going to burn slash piles.
No,
You've had input to those guys, haven't you?
we've had input. That don't confuse input with authority. Okay, I'll give you an example. There was a rule that was just passed allowing DNR permits silvicultural burning and all burning on state or federal land that's governed by state or federal officials. So this bill allows DNR to issue permits for burns inside urban growth areas on DNR land. They permit it. We do not. What happened in 2009 was a silvicultural burn that got out of whack and it impacted us. And the agency decided at the time, and I think rightfully so, to write a ticket with the intent to get the dialogue started. But in reality, there's very little that we can do on a state or a federal permitted burn.
Well, I have a different opinion than you have on some of this, both the slash burning and this stuff from the firing center, because I do believe that it affects health. As soon as that smoke starts going out, it affects health. When I drove through that smoke yesterday, wherever it was coming from, it affected my health.
Right, but I'm looking at it the same way we look at wildfires. As an air pollution control agency, other than after the fact actions and information to help protect people, okay, what can we do?
I don't know.
There's
I don't
nothing.
know. That's why I was asking if you had
That's what
dialogue with those guys.
That's a rhetorical question. There's not a lot we can do other than help our population protect themselves. And that's why 2 or 3 months, actually a week or two before the summer of 17, I had us put together the wildfire smoke information page because it's about pre-messaging and giving everybody all the options that they can have in case there's a wildfire. So I look at what goes on at the training center from that aspect the exact same way as wildfire. So they'll be out doing artillery training or small arms training. An SFA team might drop in there to do 2 weeks of training, and they're putting down way more ammo than the normal leg unit would do, and they ignite a range fire. They have their response plan, but at that point, if anybody calls us and asks for information or what we can do, we'll give them what we got. We tell them the same thing we would tell them on a wildfire. If it's impacting you, if you can, leave the area. If you're not, if you have to stay in your house, go in your house. Don't come out until the air's clean. Make sure your filters are clean. If you can send other people out to do your work, and this is all based on somebody having a compromised respiratory system. Okay, but we don't really permit their burning because it's federal land, and then the burns that they experience are, how would you say it, the inadvertent ignitions. They're not, I've got a pile.
Well, they've had enough of them over the last several years. I don't think that you can call them inadvertent.
Well, I know what starts them.
I do too.
Okay, and you used the term slash burn, and I wouldn't say they're slash burning that's ignited any of them.
Well, I'm talking the fire.
Right.
No,
But
those are purposely burned. It's
no, but I'm talking about the firing center is what I'm saying.
I mean, you might call it an accident, but they know it's going to happen if they're shooting enough and they're shooting into dry grass.
I'm not going to disagree with you that they know that hot brass casings can ignite fires, but it's not it's also the tracers that do it as well. So
Anyway, we can have a further discussion about this another time.
So back to his original question. So are you saying, Keith, that the firing center, when they have planned activities out there, whatever the heck they might be, they don't notify you as
that's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. They're a federal.
Isn't that what you asked?
They're a federal installation, but what I
One-
can
one of
tell
the
you,
things I asked.
but what I can tell you is they do have a fire suppression plan. Okay, we don't get it shared because we're not fire marshals.
I see.
Okay.
I guess my opinion is it should be shared.
Yes. I
That's my
agree.
personal opinion.
Well, what would we do if we got it? Would we put out that people are planning on doing training?
I think that those guys should be very aware that what they do affects the people of this valley. And setting fires is one of the big things that they affect. The other thing is the noise, but the fires are worse. And because a lot of times they don't just stay on the reservation, they are on the training center. They jump and burn
Yeah,
everything.
the fires
else.
propagate. Yeah,
And,
in atmosphere like this,
yeah.
it'll propagate fast.
So I think my personal opinion is that they should have input from local entities because they do affect us. And I don't think sometimes they understand that.
Yeah, I will tell you that we do have a very good working relationship with their environmental staff out there. But this is probably the one topic that's really never come up because, a lot of times they don't publish. I will tell you from an OPSEC standpoint, operational security standpoint, they don't publish all of their training because they don't want the general public knowing who's coming in and out of there. And there's a reason for that. I can't tell you anything more than that. But I will tell you that I'm pretty convinced that the number one driver of their fires, what we're talking about here, is range fires. And it's either done by some kind of real life training with live ammo. Is there something the agency could do to, we can't go out there and demand that they give us their training schedule. Because I'm going to tell you right now, that's just not going to happen. We've actually gone through, I had to go out and pave the way for us not to have to sit at the gate for security checkpoints. And that took me talking to the actual base commander, and he was real, at the time, real understanding and got us through. But, when there is a fire that's out of control and it's dumping smoke into the air shed, I think what we could do, one of the things we could do differently here is we could post on our ticker tape maybe something that puts it out. But again, getting back to the original discussion, that's going to be after the fact. It's not going to be, prior to it. But we always are always looking to better get information out to the public. And maybe that's one thing I can talk to them about is, hey, give us a call when there is a fire, and then we can put it out on our website, and then people can avoid the area if they can. You look at the reverse side of that, what would that be, the north and east side of that ridge, where all those homes are outside of Sela. And I would guess that those people aren't going to leave their homes because that's why they moved out there.
But most of
But we
the
could
fires
put
most of the fires are further east.
Yeah. So, but
south.
we could put we could probably make a little more better informational effort if I can talk to them and say, hey, when you have a fire that's going to require a major response, let us know and we'll put it out. Put it out on our website. No pun intended there. So
the last question kind of prompted something. So you get a complaint call then, you investigate it, you take what you consider to be the appropriate action. The original complainant calls back up and says you didn't do it right. What do? You just say, sorry you feel that way and hang up on them?
No, we explained on the situation as best as we can, and a lot of times it'll be this discussion right here.
But do you ever bring in a third party to verify that what you
No.
did was appropriate
No.
or whatever?
No, we do not. We
I
don't
mean, a
do
sister
third parties.
agency, I don't know, there's other clean air things that you could ask.
There's no need to do that.
Okay.
There's simply no need to do that. And we're not going to spend the resources to do that. We can explain our rationale, and people either agree or agree to disagree, and then they can do whatever they feel is right. But I have a lot of confidence in this system because I know what other agencies are doing, and I know that we have a very good complaint response program, and I've got a lot of confidence in it.
So how do you deal with a burn situation where a complaint has been made and an inspector has gone out to check on it and tells the person who made the complaint before he leaves the area that the individual burning has a burn permit, but the burn permit is not the correct one? Then what?
If we ascertain on site that the burn permit is not the correct one, we will order the guy or gal, or whoever's burned, to put it out. That's one. There will be a ticket issued for that.
Okay, I can cite it, one occurrence.
Yeah, but I'm going to tell you right here, Sandy, that we're not going to talk about individual cases, because that's not what we're here to do today. And B, I would tell you on the case that you're trying to bring up, there's a lot more to that story than what you probably know. And I'm just trying to keep it professional.
The point I'm trying to make is that checking on the type of permits that are issued, there's a gap. You got a gap here between making sure that the guy who's doing the burning has the correct permit. And, okay, that's kind of hard to do. I understand that.
I don't believe there's a gap at all. I'll just say that.
Okay, well, then the situation, the one that I know about, shouldn't have happened, okay? Because the guy had a permit, the inspector person, Dustin, knew that he had a permit. Whether he saw it or not, I don't know, but it was the wrong permit because he got it at a hardware store.
It was not the wrong permit. I believe it was not the wrong permit, and I believe that Dustin verified that. And we have hardware stores that are agents, so I would not use that analogy. If it Dustin, Kelsey, we know what we're talking about here. It was the correct permit, correct?
Yeah.
And it was issued by the correct agent. Okay, so that's what I was getting at with your assumptions and the rest of the information.
So you're saying that orchard trees can be burned under a residential permit?
There was no orchard trees on this burn.
Okay.
Now, a tree that's in your yard, if it's burned correctly, can be burned.
No, well,
But it was not orchard trees.
My understanding.
Correct, Kelsey? Is that? Am I?
Right.
She didn't go. It was Dustin.
But she was the complaints manager, so she's intimately familiar with it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. All I know is what I was told by the guy that made the complaint, and he indicated to me that it was trees that were being burned, not in the yard per se, but in a space that was west of the yard, because that side of the road there are homes and then there's orchard.
There's also, I'll also tell you, Sandy, there's a safety consideration as well. We want people to burn residentially where they're not gonna run the risk, far enough away from things where they're not gonna run the risk of igniting something like a structure, or even a fence line that's got wooden posts, that then propagates a worse situation than it is.
So what I was told was it wasn't yard type stuff or whatever, which the residential, there's like you said, a very good definition of what the residential permit should allow. But what was burned, according to the guy I talked to, was not that kind of thing, that it was in fact orchard trees.
And I disagree with that
Okay.
assessment. Now, let's just say for this discussion, that was exactly what we found when we went out there. The guy would be told to put it out, and because he was burning, and because it's a high-risk time of year, summer, we would probably go ahead and weigh everything, and we would issue an NOV, followed no closer than 30 days, an NOP, and go from there.
But okay, I don't know what NOV, all that
Notice
stuff.
of violation, and then a notice of penalty.
Okay.
So
That
everybody
isn't-
says ticket, but there's
Yeah.
really two documents that are issued.
Okay, that isn't what happened.
That's correct, because there was no violation.
I see. Okay.
So, back on the complaint issue here, are odor complaints considered to be health related?
It depends. No, but it depends, Steve, because you're asking a very general question that could apply anywhere. Let's say somebody's doing something with chemicals, and they're putting off a foul odor, you know, ammonia of some kind, or I'm just using this as an example,
No.
because we don't have 112 authority under the Federal Clean Air Act, that's DOE, and ammonia is used for cold storage, so let's just say they're working with chemicals, and it's putting off a foul odor. In that case, you got to look at the whole picture. You got to balance it. You got to see what's going on. And Hassan, with his engineering background and a little bit of his chemistry background, will probably get into it and take a look at it. But generally speaking, no. And
when Kelsey gets a complaint, does she have enough information or gathers enough information how does she go through the grid here? Because does she talk to Hassan?
Odor is an air pollutant and it is investigated. So as an air pollutant, yes.
So, when she's assigning it a level, how does she know if it's health related?
well,
To get
first
to
she'll
a
talk to
level.
the complainant and she'll ask them questions. And second of all, she'll apply her experience on, we have an odor scale, 0 to 4. Everybody in the state uses it. Generally speaking, where we differ from other state, not other state, but other local agencies, is we draw the line at a scale of 3. Now, we're not talking about fugitive dust or odors for agricultural. That's another topic. We're just talking right now, general fugitive dust and odors for the general population, not ag related for now. So she'll take the complaint. If somebody says that, I will say again, it's a high percentile for us in this neighborhood because of the atmospherics, 98, 99%, you can't tie the odor to a health-based complaint. Okay, you just can't. So what she'll do is she'll go out and she'll do her evaluation and try to determine if it's a 3 or higher on that scale, 0 to 4, because 3 is generally where a human being will blanch and will take measures to stay away from that area. And then we have to see what the source is. And then we go from there. Odors are probably the worst rules in this state because it's so subjective. So we try to stay very narrow and very clearly on what we can and can't. We'll get marijuana odors, 2 or 3 marijuana odors a year, but it's not from the processing, growing, it's from smoking.
Does she have to address a level before you go send
The RL level's the RL level. The odor evaluation scale is different.
No, I understand that, but to get the RL level that she's working on when she gets the complaint, she has to assign that level before you send anybody out to look at it. Is that true?
She has to evaluate it because you have to assess what path you're going to get on. Yes.
And
Yeah.
you just use the best information you've got
Right.
to try to determine which side of the scale you go on.
And then she's
Right.
not stuck into it. She's not pigeonholed into it. If she comes back and says it should be a 4 or a 3 when she put a 1 or a 2 on it, she can do that.
Or it could be, if she thought it
Well,
was a 3, it should
I
have been a 2.
can't tell. You know, again, 98, 90% of the times we get 3 or 4s, and 98 or 99% of the time we still go out on that one day.
So most of the time, the information that you use to determine how it goes through the grid is done over the phone and that type of thing. You don't go out
Right.
on site to gather information to go through the grid.
Yeah, and if they leave, say, a voicemail over the weekend and they're leaving pieces of information out, I'll usually just give them a call, get some more information, then go out and conduct the investigation.
But also, if she has a complaint and it's missing some information and it's alleging something that's pretty serious and it's ongoing, she doesn't have to call or even put an RL level on it. She can go out there and address it right then and there if she wants to. So there's a lot of fluidity in this from the sense that it gives her maximum ability to respond accordingly, which is what we need to do.
So the preliminary steps that you are responsible for are actually done over the phone without any examination of the actual site.
Yeah.
Generally
I'll bring
speaking.
up the county Yakima GIS, kind of check out the area. Usually try to get where on the property are they burning, just kind of that stuff, going out into the field. So.
And Dustin's position on this, Mr. Harrington's position, in my particular instance that I'm aware of, he was the individual who actually went out to the site and spoke with the person burning, rather than you.
Yes, because
Right.
they split the duties when the schedule requires them to be in different places at different times doing different duties.
Right.
I would love to have somebody that just did complaints, and then somebody that just did air monitoring, and then somebody like Dustin that handles 150 to 200 minor source inspections. But we're not DOE and EPA. We don't get to specialize in one item.
Okay, yet your new 2020 budget, in that budget that was just passed, there was a position eliminated from your agency, and my understanding was that it was one of the inspector positions. Is that correct?
I'll answer that. I'll answer that. You can look at me. I'll answer that. First of all, I'm the one that did the budget. Okay, nobody was eliminated, so that
Oh.
word is not used properly.
Okay,
So what happened was we had a young lady that went out the door for another job,
okay.
and then she was hired primarily to do dairy inspections. 3 or 4 months after that, give or take, I'm not quoting the exact time, but shortly after that, she went out, I want to say July of 18, and then in August, September, the board voted to rescind the dairy policy and make it a resource guide. Her primary duties went away, so there was no need to have that position backfilled. So nobody was let go. There was no restructuring. It was just fortuitous the way it worked out.
So the position, so there are 10 people in your agency now?
That's correct.
Didn't there used to be 11?
There was 11 when we had dairy inspection. She was hired
So,
to do
so
dairy
okay,
inspection.
okay, so the inspector that was eliminated was not a burn inspector. That position was actually not burn problems, but dairy issues.
Well, we don't have anybody called a bird inspector, okay? That's complaints, and complaints get spread out between Dustin and Kelsey, okay?
And
When
it's
it- when
always
it-
been that way. I mean, in
Yeah,
the sen-
and
in
the
the-
person that went out the door, if she had free time, she would do some complaints as well. Especially if she was going to the lower valley, and Kelsey had to do air monitoring up here on the monitoring site, and Dustin needed to go out. Is that 12 going towards Natchez and Tieton?
Yeah.
Go do something up there with a gas station. So yeah, that fluidity is awesome.
Okay.
And
Well,
that-
it
that-
sounds like, whatever you want to call your position, inspector or whatever, it sounds like there's a real need to have maybe 3 people back instead of just 2, based on what I've
There's
heard
no
you
need
say.
there. There's no
Oh,
need
there's
there.
no need.
You might say it sounds like it, but there's no need there. We are right sized right now for the work that we have.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Our complaints what's your general trend on complaints? I know I look at that board
You're
graph
confused.
every month, but I mean, I can't put that over to years.
What do you mean general trend?
Trend, increasing complaints, decreasing complaints, stay about the same? What do they do over the?
I would say over the course of the
I mean,
last
is
3 or
there a-
4 years, just my feel for it, because we don't really trend anything out. We're just not that big enough to do it. Complaints have generally gone down, but I'm not going to say it's like a drop off. They've generally gone down. It depends on the type of year, the time of year, the type of year. The new dynamic now, everybody sitting around this table knows the new dynamic now is wildfires. That changes everything.
And I think you tend to be increasing with complaints on when there's smoke in the air already from wildfires.
Yeah, that's a horse of a different color, because when we're getting complaints on a wildfire, again, there's no,
Right. You can't do
when we
anything.
know what the cause is and it's up in Kamloops, or it's down in Oregon, or it's in Cle Elum, that's where we move into the forewarned, forearmed phase, and we push the information out to our public and try to get them in. And we've made big strides the last 2 or 3 years on getting our wildfire wood smoke page out, and we've corresponded with the State Department of Health, the local Department of Health, on getting messaging out, and we hyperlink a lot of things, and we really leverage that whole thing to get it out. And, you know, it started not really 2 years ago, about 4 years ago, we had that one wildfire that impacted September for like 2 weeks. And then it just so happened that the summer of 17, summer of 18 were the worst. So.
But my comment was that during a wildfire event, people are probably more aware that it's a no burn situation. And so perhaps might call in a little more quickly on.
Actually, I would say that does happen, but not on a large scale. We get pretty good play-in and pretty good buy-in from people up and down the valley, upper and lower, on if they see something general. That's been a big change from what I've seen when I first started here in 07, when people aren't sure, they'll call us, and if we can, you know, address it with them, we'll address it on them. The majority of the complainants aren't sure. I wouldn't say the majority of them, but a good size of them aren't sure if there's a issue, and they call us for information. And if we say, oh yeah, it's an issue, then we treat it as a complaint, and then we go out and we deal with it. And if it's not, then we'll explain to them why. We don't just not explain it.
Let me ask this a slightly different way too. What do you think your average response time is to your complaints? No matter how you classify
No matter how?
No matter how you classify the RL level.
24 hours, easily?
I would say, yeah,
Within 24 hours usually?
I try to.
Yeah, because the majority of them are 3s and 4s, and we still try to get her. And if Dustin's going in get them out that day. We default to that if we can.
And that's what I was trying to lean towards, you know. Is there a necessity for additional inspectors? And if you're even picking up the response level 4 complaints within 24 hours.
There's not a need for an additional inspector. And that's, I guess if I had to paint a fine point on it or boil it down to a root cause for not needing another inspector, the volume of complaints does not justify a standalone or an additional complaint response.
Does Kelsey or the other guy, do they go, if you get a complaint on a federal burn or a state burn, if you get a complaint, do they go out on it?
They can if we need to ascertain what exactly is going on. But if we can, you know, ascertain without going out there and they can do other work, then there's no need to. And that's all part of the, you know, I wouldn't say the investigation, but the exploratory phase where we try to see what's going on.
In regard to you working with the other agencies that may have these fires for whatever reason, I think there's a difference, and you were talking about being a conduit of information once you find out where the fire is. I think there's a difference between fires that are going on in your jurisdiction and fires that are going on that impact our area out of our jurisdiction. My personal input to you guys, and I'm glad Steve's here, is that I think you guys should have more dialogue and be a part of the team for these other agencies to know what their plans are, including the firing center. And I'm saying I'm putting a big red X on those guys more than anybody,
Right.
because they have fires every frickin' year, so-called accidental. These other ones, you know they're going to burn. You've got to input to them on the timing and how many they burn, how many acres. And from what I read, they work with you on that. But that firing center is a loose cannon out there, and I think you guys should have a mechanism to at least have dialogue with those guys.
Well, we do have dialogue. I don't agree with your assessment, but we can agree to disagree. I will tell you that I'm more concerned as the Air Pollution Control Officer with entities like DNR and USFS than I am that firing center. Okay, the fuels that are going to get ignited on there are not the same type of fuels as they're going to burn up on the hills. Okay, and on top of that, DNR on what they permit, we just went through this. I fought tooth and nail not to get a bill passed with some other air directors, and you know, politics being what they are, it got passed. But DNR, the rule was written to favor DNR, but I directed Hassan to start sitting in on calls with them when they're doing their burns. And I don't want to get into the depths of this because it's
I'm
complicated.
glad to hear that.
But we were the first ones to start forcing our way in the door. But like I said earlier, I can call and explore with the director out there. Maybe there's a way when they do have an ignition that they think is going to, be substantial, that they can call us and we can put our. I think you've got. The question is what kind of buy-in we're going to get, because we certainly don't have the authority to dictate to the feds. But they're very cooperative when I've ever asked them on certain things. So I think I could.
To add to your question, during the fire season, if it is pretty bad, like 16, 17, 18, I am on the call every morning with every local, state, and federal agency on that call
Good.
every morning. So
Good.
we know exactly what's going on.
Good.
So we are full, including the Department of Health. and
Yeah, I
so
guess
on
I
and
should have
so
said
forth.
that. I know
So
he's on.
we have that.
So you've got a task force.
Of course.
Then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a group. We have the plug as well as the group is already accomplished since probably 2016 or earlier. So we are activating it either this month or next month. We will start already having the calls every morning.
This is
That's a different.
This
call.
is the wildfire group,
That's
right?
the wildfire
Okay, not to
group.
be confused with
Yes.
the DNR group,
The DNR
which
group
is
Is it
also-
mainly state and local agencies?
State
Is it federal
and
agencies?
federal.
yeah, and
also.
he's been on that for a few years.
Yeah. So, and then for the firing center, let me clarify some issues here. If it is not foreseen and accidental fire, there isn't really much they can do about
That's what I
it.
said earlier.
Now the question is, you can put the accidental, whether if you want to put it quote unquote or not, that is your prerogative. As far as the relationship we have with them, they are a registered company with us. They are subject to almost every rules as far as the Clean Air Act or the Federal Clean Air Act. They are subject to that. Do we know the people they are working in those in the training center? The answer is yes. If there is something urgent right now, I can give them a call and ask them what is going on, and they can tell you exactly straightforward. I don't think they are in the business of hiding anything, except there are certain issues that I really don't need to know. It doesn't. I don't. It's not that I don't care, but if it is a national security, then it is. I have to accept it.
Mhm.
How are they gonna move it in the night? Are they gonna cause the fire during half day? Is like, well, that is something I don't need really to be aware of. I don't need to have those information. What have you seen yesterday? I don't know. Mark also mentioned something about it. People coming from the west side, they saw something, and I haven't heard anything yet. But we could really give them a call, and they will tell us from us.
So they're getting ready to move into their annual, I think it's this time of year, their annual Japanese rotation for the
Well, they're
Japanese
doing
Defense
something out there.
Forces.
They were doing
Right.
something this last week.
But training has been beefed up out there the last few years, and it's going to continue to be more and more rotations in, because it is a maneuver training area. It's an MTC, so.
Well, there's two issues. There's fires on their ground that put smoke into this airshed, and there's the fires that jump the fence and burn up the rest of the country. And part of that is not just the smoke; it's the habitat that it destroys. I sat on a state wide
It's all
group for 2
sage-grouse
years.
protected
Yeah,
area.
they
Yeah.
burned up all the sagebrush.
Yeah,
And,
okay.
and you know that habitat doesn't come back. Sagebrush doesn't grow back overnight,
Yeah.
and they burned all that out there. What
Yeah,
was
they've got huge riparian areas. and-
a year or two ago? It burnt most of the Martinez place.
As an aviator, I had to know where all those were, because if we landed and, because depending on the aircraft you're flying, you might ignite something with a hot exhaust pipe or something. You never know. But we had to know all of that as well. So.
And you know the political situation right now in the Middle East is very hot, so we might need those fire training to something
Well,
else. So that's another
You know,
story.
yeah,
It always
well, my
is.
guess is too that they like one of the alternatives would be don't do it. 2 months out of the year, or don't do it, or quit at 10 o'clock in the morning like they make the loggers do. I mean, there are things that you could do but they probably don't want to because of
Yeah,
that.
but you
We're
know,
certainly not in a position to
Yeah.
dictate to them, because on the scale of the big boys on the block, we're not a big boy on the block. I just want to be clear about that.
And plus the mere fact is like that we can't tell them that you can't start a war except at 10 o'clock or 1 o'clock, you know. We might invade Iran just tomorrow
But
morning.
Steve,
Who
I
knows?
think, you know, I can talk to the leadership out there for sure and say, hey, look, if you're gonna have a range fire, which is 99% of the time, that's what they are. If you're gonna have a range fire, you determine now you've gotta put your fire suppression plan in effect. Because I can guarantee you, anytime somebody's rotating in and out of the range, I guarantee you, not only do they have the fire trucks there, but there's either a Chinook with a Bambi bucket or a Blackhawk with a Bambi bucket sitting out there during these months. Because I used to do that out there.
I don't disagree with you. I know they're there, but they still get away from them.
No, I understand. But that's where I was going with this is if they feel that it's going to be bigger than, we'll just say, some kind of average, you know, impact or whatever, they could just give us a courtesy call, and then we can just start pushing information out to people as well. From a preventative side of the coin, though, I just don't. There's really nothing we could do.
Yeah.
I can make a call to the good
No.
Lord tonight, but I don't know if he's taking my call
I
yet.
guess they should give you the courtesy to give you their fire suppression plan, I think.
A few years back, probably 98, 99, 2000, around that area, we used to issue in collaboration with the Department of Ecology a permit
I
for
thought,
them.
that's what I thought, yeah.
Yes, it's obscurant, okay? That is
Well,
a difference.
obscurance, yeah.
Yeah, different. So because of the state and basically whatever you want to call it, national security or whatever, the rules has changed in the WAC. So really they don't need that variance. We call it a variance. So we used to do that, but the WAC has changed since then, and they really didn't need that variance. So that's another thing. So if you're seeing just only a smoke or something else, that's
Now they have a
different
dust
story.
control plan
Yeah.
followed on us, and
Yes.
they handle that perfectly. And
Yeah.
every 4 or 5 years they update it, and that whole thing was generated on the changing in the obscurant training rules. They don't want their obscurant to go off res, so they do a in-depth atmospherics check, and they won't even conduct the obscurant training if it's going to have any chance of leaving the res.
Well, that's interesting. They don't treat the fires that way.
That's why I said the parallel is more closer to the wildfires than anything. Good question, though.
But if it is under the Department of DNR and they needed a permit, they get that permit from the Department.
From
of
DNR, yeah.
DNR, yeah. They have to have one, so.
I just thought maybe you could get Kelsey a Hummer and just set her up there on top.
Turn your loose out there. All right.
Hey, when we went out there to do a site inspection, these guys were getting delayed at the
Don't
gate.
forget the snorkel.
These guys were getting delayed at the gate, so I went out and talked to the civilian head of the whole thing, and he was understanding, but we still have to take a bunch of documentation with us when we go on there, so we're not waiting to get passed through. They've been very, very cooperative with us. That doesn't surprise me, though. So, any other questions on the topic?
Got a couple. If nobody else.
No, go ahead. You're good.
This is a general question. Would you say the air quality in Yakima County is getting better or worse?
Compared to what?
Just overall.
Since the 90s, it's gotten demonstrably better because we had a PM10 issue. Now it's a PM 2.5 issue. And just to be clear, we are in attainment for PM 2.5. So, and our risk is not during the whole year. Generally speaking, the last 2 years are the outliers with the wildfires. But generally speaking, it's the winter months when we have outdoor burning combined with home heating for heat.
Okay. Do we look at any kind of a risk for non-compliance with the federal air standards?
I don't know what you're asking.
Well, I think you kind of already answered it because you said there's been an improvement in since the 90s. So
Well-
I'm thinking that's kind of part of it.
Yeah, well, the agency in the outdoor burning WAC has been called a at-risk area for PM 2.5 non-attainment. but we know what puts us at risk. It's the winter heating months, coupled with any outdoor burning because of the inversions and everything that goes on with those atmospherics. So the last 2 summers, the wildfire data is not going to count in any compliance determination because it's all going to be flagged because that's act of God.
Yeah.
So
This year in February, when we had the winterish type weather, did
The
that
late winter,
did
yeah.
that how did that affect the air quality?
Hassan, can you refresh my memory? Because I know we had a period there. That was when they had the winter. They had the storm.
Yeah, I was just kind of
we
curious.
had
If it made
some-
it better or worse? Or?
Well, it was
I'm sorry. What's
in
the-
February,
February
when
when
we
we had the late winter.
events, did that make air quality in the county better or worse from that winter? That's kind of severe winter event.
Wind is always good for us, but I do know that right around that time we had a couple of
in March.
exceedances,
Yes,
late
we had-
late February,
we had
early
two
March.
incidences in March. As a matter of fact,
But that's getting to what I was saying is you have extremely cold. The dynamic is clear. You have extremely cold temperatures. You have a below average, rate of income in this county. So people turn to wood, cheap and easy, and plentiful to heat their homes because they don't want to be tied to electric or gas. In my opinion, rightfully so. And then you get an inversion that rolls in. That dynamic has been around for, at least 30 or 40 years. And so late February, early March, so your storm comes in when the cattle died, you had high winds. The issue is when that low passes and you get a high pressure system that sets in over and you got extremely cold temperatures. And I think that's when we had our exceedances.
the one in March in particular, as of this minute I'm talking, I can't really defend exactly any decision from a scientific point of view I have taken, not to call even a burn ban. There was nothing really for it to call for one. But even what it was on the actual ground, we should never have that exceeded. That day in particular, that should not have happened based on what we have.
Based on the atmospherics and the looking out
Based on
24 to
what we
48
have.
hours.
Exactly.
But as you guys know,
Yeah.
it changes.
So it is something that was unusual for the past 20 years. I actually bet on that we will not have an exceedance, but
He would have lost.
I would have.
So burn ban calls and predicting the weather is a art that's based in science.
Mhm.
So we're going to win some, we're going to lose some, but generally speaking, we get it right. And he's done a hell of a job the last 20 years, because he's gained a bunch of knowledge. And I tell people at the state and EPA all the time, if you need to make a decision in our neck of the woods, you're making a mistake not consulting the local airshed expert. And we're starting to get playing in that, buying on that. And then the DNR, that's why I told him to start sitting in on the calls when they happen for DNR. Because the DNR, it's kind of critical to us locals because it has the potential to permit, burns inside an urban growth area. And the whole purpose for having an urban growth area, besides urban growth management, is to protect people population centers. So we're kind of forcing our foot in the door there to be that expert here in the local airshed.
So there's been no increase in, for lack of a better term, bad air quality, even though we have maybe 1,000 head of decomposing cattle that are on compost piles. There's been no, from the monitors that the agency has, there's been no kind of information coming off this process?
It's not there is no information coming out of this process, but the truth of the matter is whatever the monitors reads, whatever the monitor reads, as far as the PM 2.5, as well as far as the PM 10, that's the reading. But your question was a while ago: is our air quality is improving from the past until the current? The answer to that with certainty, as far as I am concerned, just only based on the time I have been living here for 23, 24 years, there is an improvement. And the truth of the matter, when I started even working way back then with Les, is that I bet with him that every permit I issue, if I could have saved the air emissions as far as 1 ton with every piece of equipment for 20, 15 years of lifetime, that's already 20 tons. And you multiply that and so on and so forth. But the question is, are we at risk for becoming non-attainment for PM 2.5? The answer is yes, because our problem, as Keith was explaining, is during the winter time, is not during the summertime or springtime, because we do have the air is very active. We have a very good movement during those years. So the area, it's a kind of a ball, as you see. And then when winter is most of the time we have those cap or those inversions, which really concentrates the air emissions at one locations. So the answer is that's where our problem is really lying.
Okay,
Getting
you're using a general.
That's the general. So now I'm not gonna avoid your question. So
Okay, good.
you're talking about composting. Composting is a natural process. So you don't, when you start the composting today, 21 days from the time you started and so on and so forth, there is also a peak and then it goes down. That's the way how the composting is. But those 1,000 cows is going to increase the PM 2.5 by 20 or 30 times of the actual value. The answer is no, absolutely not.
Yeah, there's no degradation of the airshed for that specific.
Reason.
Yep.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is, even though because of this horrible thing that happened in February and all this stock died,
Yes.
and the majority of the stock, apparently, cows were composted, I believe.
That's
I think
But,
the majority.
but what I'm trying to say is, this did not have, this composting process of all these dead animals did not have a registrable response on your air quality equipment.
The answer is no. Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted
that's
to
the
know.
answer. And then they let me clarify that also based on what I know and based on some facts. It's a fact, and some people they can testify to that. The majority of the cows were transported outside the county for rendering.
No, that is not correct.
Okay.
That is not
We
correct.
can agree to disagree. That's the reason.
Yeah, that's the information. I just want to be clear. That's the information I received from the State Department of Health. Is that the majority? There was 2 places where they were composted, and by now they're gone. The composting's done.
Okay.
But my understanding is also that Department of Health had active participation, eyes on,
Absolutely.
and they were very happy with the process. But my understanding is the same as Hassan's, because I was told this, that the majority of them, the majority of the dead cattle were actually under money provided by the state on some kind of grant or federal grant. I don't know which one, but they were.
Where are you getting your information, Sandy?
Sage Park and David Bowen, a meeting with Ecology where they stated at the meeting that I attended that it was their understanding that there were about 800 cows that were in fact trucked to or shipped to an Oregon landfill. That means the remainder of the dead cows, approximately 1,000, because the newspaper, again I'm going in this, 1,850 dead cows supposedly. That means the majority of the stock that died, at least 1,000, were composted or something of
Some
that.
of them were rendered, Sandy, and
Rendered,
some of them
okay.
were buried.
Yeah, and I can't tell you about
And
that.
there were
just my
4
numbers.
different ways that they were disposed of.
Okay.
Composting, rendering, buried, and taken to the landfill out of state.
Okay.
So that's why Hassan is saying the numbers that aren't
And the
there.
renderer did as many as he could,
But
he was overwhelmed, so they didn't.
yeah,
somehow-
that's what I was told, that there was a limited number of them being rendered because he simply couldn't deal with it.
Yeah,
But your number isn't accurate on how many.
So it's
would
not
come.
1,000? Okay. What would you say it would be?
It was less than 1,000.
Which means nothing. How much less?
Not at liberty to give you that.
And it
number.
doesn't really.
Oh, there we
for-
go, we're not at
For,
liberty.
for what we're
Okay.
doing here today, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
'cause
yeah, no,
The
well, I-
composting's had no impact on the air.
That's what I wanted somebody to say about that.
Doesn't matter what the
process.
number is.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what- that's
that's,
what I just
that's,
said.
that's what I wanted to hear.
You know, there are air emissions from composting. There is no but no if about it. I'm not saying, but that's those the 1,000, even if it's hypothetically speaking 1,000 cal, that's gonna spike our air monitor to, let's say, double.
Well, that's what I wanted.
No, the answer will not. That's not gonna happen.
Well, that's what I wanted to
That's
hear.
that's.
And you're the guy that's got the info on that one.
That's the science of it. That's the science part of it.
What other questions do we have on the topic today? If not, I think this will conclude the compliance forum for June of 2019. I want to thank everybody for showing up. Thank Steve and Sage Consult for supplying the topic.
Thank you for the.
Yep, you can keep that, and just know that there's a backside to it.
And I appreciate what you're doing, and I think you're doing a good job on it.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you for having Kelsey
Appreciate
come.
it. I'm gonna do the topic.
Nice to see you all.
Nice to see your face.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so our complaints program is a reflection of, obviously, the agency, but all the hard work and dedication Kelsey puts into it as well. So thank you all for coming, and we're always free for phone calls, walk-ins, and email questions as well. So that'll complete the presentation.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Pamela?